Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the patient story here for part two of Bill's story. Bill, you've been incredible. This last segment that we just went through, you described quite a lot. Your first diagnosis, that was a misdiagnosis, and several different treatments. Finally, we're at this place where you find the right doctor who has all the resources that he needs because you have CLL with Richter's transformation, which is very rare. And he finally says, okay, Bill, we're going to go into a clinical trial. And here's the plan. We're going to do BITE and then, or bispecific, and then we're going to go into CAR T after that. So tell me about what it means to start even talking about getting into a clinical trial. What did Dr. Awan say to you about what was necessary for you to make sure you qualify, and the logistics of getting you into one? And then actually, you know what, before we go there, I actually want to ask, what was your first reaction when he said the term clinical trial?
It was, I was familiar with clinical trials. We got our first initiation into cancer therapy 25 years ago when my third daughter, at 9 years old, contracted a brainstem tumor. And there is no, I mean, the first word I had from a doctor is, these don't heal. I mean, he basically said, we can't fix this. So the only way that there was any hope for her is out in a lab someplace in a research center. So for my daughter, she pretty much began with clinical trials. And we went through a lot of them, and pediatric brain tumors, I think that's probably the toughest cancer nut to crack there is. In 25 years, I really haven't gotten beyond where it was with her. They're just so hard. And anyway, that's where I got thrown in the deep end of the pool. So when Dr. Awan says a clinical trial, I fully understood what he was talking about. I knew the difference between phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. I was actually hoping that there was a promising stage 2 or 3 that I could qualify for. It turns out I am participating in a phase 1, which I can say more about that in a minute. But clinical trials were not scary. I knew that in really difficult, hard to cure diseases, the true therapies that will finally succeed are today going to be in a clinical trial someplace. And Dr. Awan was never unclear about that from the beginning. Our epoch was just a cleansing thing before we try the stem cell transplant. And if that didn't work, then we are off into the clinical trials. And that's where I am.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that that was your first experience with clinical trials, is to know that from a parent caregiver perspective. But it makes sense in this context of why you weren't suddenly like, what is that? Because you had been familiarized with phase 1, 2, 3 already. Now going into the actual being a participant yourself, the paperwork or figuring out, do I qualify? I mean, can you talk to us about just even the steps of getting into a clinical trial, what you had to go through?
Well, the criteria for participating in a clinical trial is set by the company that wants the drug to be tested. Dr. Awan had slated me for one clinical trial, and then his coordinator started digging into the requirements, and she discovered that the company had specified that the participant could only have one therapy post standard therapy, and I'd had 2. So I didn't qualify. So then we went to a second clinical trial where that wasn't a factor, and it was the phase 1 of the particular drug I'm being tested on now. I could have 2 therapies post standard therapy, and they would allow me to. Then, of course, they want to know my age. They want to check out my heart. They want to check. They want me standard and healthy enough so that results that come in aren't complicated by other health problems that I might bring to the participation. They don't, and that's understandable. So there was lots of scans and examinations and stuff to verify that I met all the criteria the drug company asked for, and I was approved, and we began on March the 21st.
So when you finally, well, in terms of insurance and all that kind of stuff, like payment and making sure that people don't understand the way that it works with clinical trials a lot of times. Can you describe that for us?
Well, in clinical trials, the funding for that is really coming from the drug company. And that includes the hospitalization, if they want you in the hospital, PET scans, anything that is medically necessary to get you through there. If you have an adverse consequence and they have to medicate you or put you in ICU, that didn't happen. But if it did, it's the drug company pays for that. So the patient is contributing his cooperation as a participant, and the drug company is covering all the medical costs.
Yeah, the reason I asked you is because people are unaware of sort of, that's the first question, like, well, how do I pay for this? So largely that's what happens. But I think what's really important is to talk to your oncologist, your specialist, about all these sorts of things ahead of time, because it does vary what they cover in terms of the details. And so I think it's great to have that up front. So thank you, Bill. So let's talk about what it's been like. What is the actual regimen of the treatment? How often are you going in, and what's that whole process?
It's pretty intense at the beginning because it is the first time in humans, and there is no data on what's going to happen. And so everybody wants to be super cautious that if something goes off the rails, we can manage it quickly. And that means put me in a hospital setting. So for the last 3 weeks, I got 1 more week to go. As the last 3 weeks have gone, I enter the hospital on a Sunday afternoon and just get settled in. Monday morning, bright and early, they do some blood labs about, 5 in the morning. That is to determine what my white cell count is. The drug that is going to be administered to me might be adjusted up or down slightly, depending on what my white blood cell count is. Then it's been about 10 o'clock, they begin some pre-medications, some dexamethasone, a pretty stout steroid, and some Tylenol and an antihistamine. These are all prophylactic to kind of put a lid on what they think is likely to be a reaction, but they don't know. But they want to be, let's just be careful. Then they give you this infusion through an IV. I've got a PICC line here. They hook me up to the IV pole and infuse the drug over a period of 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, begins another 4-hour observation period. They just simply are, they're taking EKGs very frequently. They're taking vitals for the first 2 hours. They're doing vitals every 15 minutes for 2 hours. I just wear the pressure cuff on my arm. I don't even take it off. Then it's like every 30 minutes for the next hour. And then it's every hour for, they're watch. They don't know. it's kind of tedious, but I do understand. I don't mind, because I really do understand why they need and want to watch so carefully. And frankly, I'm glad. Now, nothing has happened, which is great. But I'm happy that had anything ever happened, bang, they were right there. So then I remained in the hospital for 2 more days. Just I take my laptop, I have work I do, I have writing I do. And then on Thursday, we do the whole thing again. And then at the end of the day on Thursday, I'm discharged to go home. And then I spend Friday and Saturday at home. And then the next Sunday, which is tomorrow, I'll go back in again. Next week will be the last hospital stay. And after that, infusions will not be twice a week, but just once a week at the clinic. It'll be an outpatient thing. And so I don't know how long that goes. I'd have to check the protocol, probably another month or 2. And eventually it'll go to an infusion every 2 weeks and then every month. Meanwhile, they're taking PET scans all the way through here, watching what's going on with these swollen lymph nodes. Are they changing? Not changing? If they do change, which direction and how much and how fast? They don't know. And so
it's a very involved process.
it's extremely involved at this point. In a phase 1, I think it's probably extremely involved when they don't have any roadmap at all. And they really do need to be careful and very thorough in their watching.
Which, again, to your point, is what you want. It's a first in humans
exactly.
research, and you want all of the T's crossed and I's dotted. So they're taking your vitals very frequently. So that's what your blood pressure, your oxygen level, are they taking temperature?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they're furiously recording everything. How many people are you working with every time? Is it the same is there a clinical trial nurse on site? Who's there?
There is a research team from Dr. Awan's clinic. Dr. Awan is the chief investigator, but he has his assistants who are actually in the hospital managing the paperwork. As these reports are being gathered, they're sending them to the drug company. I don't know where it's located. I think there's actually an office in the States and one in Europe someplace. But actually doing the infusion is a very simple thing. It's just an IV infusion. And so the local floor nurses on the floor, I'm on an isolation floor in this hospital. It's the place where stem cell transplants, CAR T, extended chemo like I did last summer. It's highly protected. You got HEPA filters everywhere and negative pressure stuff. I don't know. There's stuff in the architecture that is designed to keep that thing as sterile as possible. Nobody can get in there except patients and medical people. So.
I actually wanted to ask about that. I know during COVID also things have just been different in terms of visitors, but a lot of times in the beginning when you're not in such a controlled environment, maybe the first line treatment of chemo, typically you're allowed visitors, to help pass the time or just to be a support system. What's it been like to have to go to such a sterile environment where you're surrounded by research team members and without, a family or friend with you?
It's not been bad. You and I are talking here face to face. Well, my wife do this too. We converse a couple of times a day by Zoom or phone. She would much prefer me to be here in the evenings, but the fact that we're kind of like separated in different universes, no, that's not really been the experience. I got to know most of the floor staff in the 6 weeks I was in that floor last summer. And so when coming back, I was like, hi, good to see you again. I know a lot of them. And so that's good. And I don't feel lonely or, like, oh, I'm so good. No.
I didn't ask you this before, but so you have these two infusions, and it's the BITE or bispecific T cell engagers, where they're really attaching your own T cells to the cancerous cell, and that's how they're fighting it. I know this one you had talked about is even deeper than that. Can you talk about side effects, right? That's what people are very interested in. Did you feel any big side effects? If so, when did you start to feel them?
This time I had a reaction. There's something called rigors. It's like severe chills. And it's not uncommon as a reaction to an infusion, any infusion. I just never had one of those. And they give you Demerol and Benadryl, and within 5 minutes it was gone. And it never came back. It never happened again. So I don't think it was related to the drug. As far as what I see about the drug, I'll just report, okay? I can't judge this drug. I'm not the doctor, I'm not the researcher, I'm not the clinician. I do know that when I went in, I had a lump about the size of an apricot pit right here in front of my ear. Another very painful lump under my earlobe. It was a lymphomocyte. Within 2 days after the first infusion, it disappeared. Of course, I was like, whoa, that's amazing. Now I've got I had this big thing under here. It's now today, after 3 infusions, about 50% of what it was. And I told Dr. Awan this. I said, I am flabbergasted at the speed of the changes. And I've thought a lot about what he said, because he looked at me and he said, well, it's early days. That's about all he said. And I've thought about that a lot. And here's my supposition. He's done lots of clinical trials. He's probably seen many immediate improvements, which over time didn't pan out. So my enthusiasm is not something he's going to join in. You see? Now, am I hopeful? Well, of course. Do I, reflecting on it, think that I'm going to get over this by this drug? Well, I hope so, but I don't know yet. We're going to find out. In the meantime, I'm having fun because it is quite frankly a delight to get a medicine and see something as dramatic as that. I mean, holy cow. I think, wow. This stuff is amazing. It is, right now for me, it is amazing. So.
And not to get in the weeds, but the
Right.
fact that they're able to get more and more precise with these things
Exactly.
is wonderful.
Exactly.
And to think that you have at least this option, right? That all of these studies are happening. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And I know you have one more week to go with the 2 infusions a week, and then it goes to once a week, and then maybe bi-weekly after that, and then monthly. So Dr. Awan has just said, this is sort of for the foreseeable future. He hasn't really said how long ballpark you'll be on this before the CAR T would maybe be in the plans.
I haven't got anything specific, but I think the BITE trial that I'm participating in, I'll continue with that until it either stops working. In other words, PET scans show that there's no changes. They keep giving me medicine, or it starts progressing again, or it disappears. A PET scan comes back clean. And then he would probably want to say, okay, now let's throw the CAR T in.
Bill, how often are you getting a PET scan done? Have you gotten multiple yet, or?
The first PET scan in this trial is going to be April the 26th.
So after the twice a week infusions?
Yes, the twice a week infusions, then they're going to do a PET scan and see what, I know they're going to see a shrinkage. I can see a shrinkage. I mean, good grief. I can't see a shrinkage in my spleen or, the iliac region of my gut. I can't see that. But where the nodes are close to the surface, the inguinals in here, and, up here, I can palpate, and it's, they're gone here and going away here. And I think, happy, happy, happy.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, I was asking, I mean, I think that's great to know in terms of how you let people know how you're doing. I know sometimes the clinical trials themselves, to be more specific, will ask patients or require patients to say, here's what I'm feeling, here are the side effects. Did the clinical trial or the company ask you to do that?
No, actually they didn't. Now, if they're somebody's writing down things I report, that's fine. I don't mind, of course.
So I guess then they do have people asking you questions while you're there, though. They're maybe asking you questions, right? I guess how often is that happening? How often are they, Bill, what's going on? Tell us about what's happening in your,
well, it happens pretty frequently. I mean, there's on that floor with the kind of therapies they're doing for patients, there can be central nervous system complications, especially when you get into stem cell transplants or CAR T. And so SOP, when the nurse comes in for those patients, is to say, tell me your name and your birthday. Where are you? What day is this? What town are you in? Recite the months of the year backward, things like that. And I was chatting with one of the nurses one day about this. I said, you do this every time. I've got these months memorized. Can't you come up with a different? She laughed. She says, I had a patient about a year ago. I walked into her room and she was chatting just like you are with me. And I said, who's the president? And she said, William McKinley. And I thought she was joking. And I said, what year is it? And she said, I think it's 1830. Anyway, the woman was, lucid, but totally in a different. So yeah, they check up there, and they regularly are asking to be sure that, I'm still compos mentis. And